This is the ZMAR Podcast. Elite Benefits of America helps small and mid-sized companies with their health insurance programs. And now, your host, Butch ZMAR.
So everything's about money in and money going out. So even if we look at even personal finances, you should not be spending the money going out more than what's coming in. But somehow companies across America, small and large, go through this process, and they avoid this idea of controlling costs in healthcare. And the expectation of healthcare is definitely completely old school, and they tried to manipulate the renewal and the cost that's going involved because of their own expectations. And so people say, well, I should only have to pay a certain amount. I should only have a copay. And we hear about this from the employee. They're like, well, my past job, I only had a $500 deductible and you're giving me $1,500. Well, you're not working there anymore, right? And maybe they have bigger budgets, right? There's a number of reasons. So we have this expectation that healthcare should be a certain way. But we don't really know what those costs are going into it, right? So that's the problem with employees. They don't know what the true cost of healthcare. All they see is what they're paying at the counter or at the doctor's office, and it seems to be an issue, right? So, but even internally, so you got HR, you got CFOs, owners, partners, board of directors. They have a certain expectations. So when we start going into these meetings, either because they're inviting other people in to basically have a proposal against their current guy, or they're shopping their current broker or advisor because they feel like they want to validate everything they've been doing, but also maybe even look for other opportunities. And so they have a certain expectation. So you go in there, and sometimes they won't even give you the time of day. You got 10 minutes to tell me your story. Well, you know what? It's not an elevator pitch. It's not a sales pitch. It's called consultative approach to strategies, right? And so things take time, and then things take a time of investment, and things take money investment. And so there's a lot of things that go into it. And then when we get this magic renewal and it's 15% increase, we throw up our arms. And in a lot of cases, you don't have much of a choice. There's not enough disclosed data to actually see what those claims reports are. And larger groups, they get access to it, whether it's fully insured or self-funded, but still there's a lot of things hidden in fully insured plans that they don't have access to, like administrative fees and whatnot. Even commissions, for that matter, are not necessarily disclosed. So that becomes an issue. But they have this certain expectation. So but if you actually had access to more data, you might be able to understand it more. We had a renewal that came in 16% increase, but we actually had a claims report. Apparently, one or two employees had several $100,000 worth of claims, and they had no idea. And not that they should, but they just had no idea that there was any type of employee absence or any patterns. And so they were kind of surprised. They're like, wow, 16%. And they shelled out, like $1 million worth of claims overall for the whole year. Not too shabby, right? So there's a different expectation when you have the data versus not having the data. And I think that's why, so there's this Mercer report that CFO.com actually used, for some data that they were trying to produce. And from a CFO's perspective on healthcare, 72% of them said that healthcare is unpredictable for their company expenses. They just don't have any control over it. So even companies that are over 500 employees are actually the most concerned from the survey with this Mercer report. And so the average cost is just nearing $16,000 per employee. We could go back even, and don't quote me on the timeline, but it could be 10, 15 years ago, and that number per employee was, I wouldn't say half, but it's a little bit less than half, lower than what it's at currently at $16,000 an employee. Regardless of the size of the company, though, 83% of the CFO surveys were more concerned about the higher cost claims, right? They talked about claims between $100,000 and $1 million. In the past, it was extremely rare that this would ever occur, but as time goes on, it is increasingly more common that these high claims are actually there. And there's many reasons for this, right? So cost of healthcare is going through the roof. Just the cost of service and utilization is there. But on top of it, providers are gaming the system a lot more, especially since the Affordable Care Act. And I'm not trying to pinpoint the blame on them, but there's no accountability for them. And that's I think a major source of the problem. I always say insurance companies are a byproduct of the whole health insurance world, or just the whole healthcare world, because again, they're money in, money out. They have billions of dollars in reserves. If they overpay on claims one year, they will make it up the next year. They are not concerned about that aspect of it, because most of them are large. Now, you go back before the Affordable Care Act, there might be some smaller companies that would have some concern, but that's why they scrutinize at claim time. And so some people would complain, well, you shouldn't be auditing at claim time. Well, you know what? If there's a fraudulent claim, they rather find out before they wrote the check than after. Whereas big companies that are nationwide carriers or perception of being nationwide, they have reserves, right? So they don't really care. They're going to auto process these because it's not worth their time. They're going to save money and time by just auto processing a lot of these, and then let the system or software pick it up. And that's going to get more and more. It's going to get flagged as AI becomes a lot bigger and more common in the workplace, especially for big insurance tech companies. But on top of all that, 69% of the CFO surveys were more concerned actually about the high cost of medications. There's huge profit in this. And in some cases, insurance companies, the only reason they're profiting is because of the pharmacy benefit manager. That's the only reason. Otherwise, if you just took that out of the mix, let's say they hired a third-party company to do it and they're just paying service fees, they would be in the hole. They would be losing money on healthcare. But they design it that way. And so I don't, sure, they might say, well, we're trying to control healthcare costs. Well, you know what? You're not helping the end user anyways. You're only worried about your pocketbook. And that's probably why they're worried about stockholders more than policyholders. So even like Mark Cuban, I'm not a big fan of Mark Cuban. He's done a great thing out there, Shark Tank, the whole thing. But, but he's done other good things out there. So like he created this company called Cost Plus Drugs, or I'm not 100% certain on the name, but I know some of our clients use it and they pass it out to their employees. But there's a 15% markup on their drugs, and they show what the transaction cost is. So they say, they actually publish and say, okay, we paid $100 for this drug, we're going to charge you $115. Like, it's very clear on what's going on. And in fact, he was interviewed recently, and it was on a podcast. You guys could probably look it up, but I forget the guy's name, but that interviewed him. But he said that because it was a question about what do you want your competitors to do if you're doing this? And he's like, I just want them to disclose their pricing. That's it. They can still do their own business model if they choose to. What I want is them to be more transparent and show what they're actually buying those drugs for. And when I know there was, I don't think it was directly related to the podcast, but I know somebody had reached out to a big pharmacy benefit manager, one of the biggest ones out there, that people recognize on billboards and even at the local street corners. And they would not comment on disclosing their fees. And so that should tell you enough, right? Just be aware, you're not going to know with those other pharmacy benefit managers. If your company is in a position where probably big enough, meaning the number of employees where you have a little leverage to actually build a true self-funded plan, or even a captive in some cases. And you could pick and choose based on the information that's there. And so there's a lot of transparent pharmacy benefit managers out there. You just got to find them, or just call an advisor that already has the connections. The Mercer report also indicated that 25%, so probably only 25% in some cases, but CFOs do not revisit the forecasting of healthcare throughout the entire year. And so it didn't matter if it was fully insured or self-funded. They don't revisit it. They do the renewal, they shut it and forget it, and then they stick it in a drawer and then hope to never actually see it again. In fact, they probably do some Hail Marys and Our Fathers and says that I don't want to touch that again. But I guess I'm being a little facetious there, but I'm saying that it's a real thing that they don't want to touch it again. But meanwhile, only 19% are checking healthcare costs 4 or more times per year. It's like a needle for them. They're a gas gauge. They're trying to figure out where things are going, more predictable. 60% of them only check it 2 times or less. And so the majority of the people are not checking the healthcare costs and trends and what the indicator is with these healthcare costs for their company throughout the year. And it's unbelievable. The data's in there that shows that CFOs, again, I think every CFO that has a job managing healthcare expenses for the company for a benefit program, they should be audited themselves. What due diligence are you doing? In fact, the Consolidated Appropriations Act is going to make them more accountable, and the company's going to be fined. So your job's on the hook for sure. And that's not a threat for me. That'll be a threat when you get the invoice from the federal government. So that's not my gig. Managing premiums of hundreds of thousands of dollars, in some cases, or in many cases, depending on who's listening to this podcast, could be millions of dollars worth of premiums. It's not hard to get up to $1 million these days with company health insurance plans. Tens of millions is obviously there. And most CFOs barely check to see what the needle's doing throughout the entire year. But I tell you, I bet there's other financial reports they're checking on a regular basis. How about that real estate division? How many times they check that, right? Where's the income? Where's the rents, right? And I'm sure if you're building widgets in China or overseas anywhere, and all of a sudden, there's a hiccup somewhere, you already had a pulse on it because you're checking on it. But healthcare, nah, just stick it in a drawer and just let's forget about it until next year. So for those who are checking it, 17% of them with the fully insured plans said the outcome of the costs remain about the same regardless of the time that they invested into it. And I find that interesting, but I feel like those are a little bit of the naysayers that says, well, we walked the walk, but nothing changed, right? And it's probably accurate to a certain, especially when you look at the 80-20 rules for 80-20 principles, where in this case, 20% are going to, be one way and 80% are going to say, well, maybe there's some outcome to this, and then there's probably a percentage that don't even touch this at all. And then 33% said that their healthcare costs actually went up on the fully insured plan. So they're data checking this thing, and throughout the year, they're noticing that there's actually a blip in expenses. Those claim ratios are going up throughout the year. And so compared to only 10% on fully insured. And so those who are checking the data have the pulse on this. And self-insured plans are 1/3 of the uptick compared to fully insured. And then it goes back to pray and hope that nothing changes, that over 50% of those CFOs surveyed were hoping that the cost doesn't exceed inflation. And I find that interesting is because it's kind of like holding on the seat of your pants and you're trying to just ride through this roller coaster ride without throwing up or getting flown out. But it's going to increase, but how are you controlling it? You can't just say that, well, it is what it is, and I'll control it at the end of the year. It's already too late at that point for that renewal. But you have to keep checking the needle. You have to keep doing the work, just like you do with any other line items, right? But you can't expect things to change. It's like people that say, well, I was late because of the train, right? No, the train had nothing to do with you being late. You just didn't plan accordingly. And so, sure, that caused you to be late, but you also didn't prepare for it either. But for the last 2 decades, and this is probably where this stems from, where they feel that they would lose control of the healthcare cost if it exceeds inflation, is that typically for the last 2 decades, it's only exceeded inflation by 1% to 2%. That's it. And so they feel like that's manageable, but they also have 20 years of experience managing that. Today's different, completely different, and bracing for shock isn't going to work anymore. And they believe that anything above that mark would actually be uncontrollable for the company for the expenses overall. And then, therefore, only 1/3 of those CFOs, if they actually took the time and invested, they think that they would actually have an impact on the outcomes. Whereas 19% of the CFOs said that they don't have enough information to make any decisions on any of the expenses going on with healthcare. And it's quite interesting because I think that the approach to healthcare is completely wrong. It's old school. It's probably worked in the 70s and 80s. In case people forgot, we're in the 2020s now. And so times have changed. How we control costs change. You're not operating your business the same as you were in the 80s. So things have definitely changed. And that's why a lot of the concern right now is managing those costs, but they think that they could manage those costs just through plan designs and network strategies, which are both key strategies when you're putting it all together, but that's not everything. You could have plan designs to try to create a financial disincentive to use healthcare, but then your employees are not using healthcare because they don't want to spend the money. You could actually reverse it and spend a little extra money as an employer and then lower the cost. But the trade-off is going to be, well, I need to make up for it in the network. Well, then your employees don't have access to some of the best facilities in the country to get access to care so that they could survive that treatment or get access to better care or have better outcomes or recoveries. Or most of them, 70% of them, of the CFOs that were surveyed, believe that on a self-funded plan, they actually do have enough information to control the cost effectively. So now we're in a position with all this data that you're in a position to control it effectively. That's where an advisor or broker, consultant comes in the mix, because now we have data, and I would not expect an employer to figure out, okay, now we have this information, what do we do with it, right? And how do we implement it? And how do we control some of this stuff, right? And that's where consultant, because it'll take you a long time to figure out, okay, how do I go out there and figure out who these vendors are. There's a guy, I think his name was Steve Watson. I mentioned him a few times on this podcast. He's a CPA's CFO out of Arizona. He's got his own podcast. I think it's called Trendsetters. And he went out and did all this homework and figured it out on his own. And now he consults with other companies on the side, just try to pay it forward kind of deal. But obviously he's getting paid for his time. But he went out there and tried to do it. Well, there's a lot of time invested. He did that. But he just got irritated with that he couldn't control this aspect of the cost. Nobody has enough pride in their job, such as CFOs all over the country, to actually try to do what this guy did. But finding those advisors to get access to resources maybe you haven't heard of. They're the ones doing the homework. We're going to conferences. We're having the conference calls. We're having vendors reach out to us to provide solutions. Well, we may have dozens of people at our disposal that you may only have one or two. So we just have choices. But 30% admitted that they don't even know how to read the data that they receive. And this is a big problem. And so if you're a CFO owner out there and you get this report, you got to figure out how to do it. If you don't know, you could pay somebody to do it, right? So, you could use your advisor, your broker, and you may have to pay them costs. A lot of them are doing it for free, but I'm just saying, be willing to pay the cost since you're not willing to invest the time or don't want to or don't know how to. And then get the information translated to you. Like, hey, we're having a high number of ER visits. How do we control this? How do we find lower cost facilities but higher outcomes, right? There's data out there. You got a full-time job. You're trying to run this company. You're trying to make sure employees have their job and their health care and customers having the products, widgets, or services in their hands so they could use it so that everybody could be successful, not only just for yourself, but everybody else in the whole chain. And so how are you going to have time to go figure this out? So that's why we bring it back to predictability, right? 72% of the claim expenses in a health plan are unpredictable to be controlled, right? And so putting together the right plan options and the right strategies, you could actually combat a lot of these. CFOs are dealing with a budget with healthcare being the top 3 expenses in their entire company. And then a lot of them just give up. They just they feel vulnerable, right? And smaller companies are definitely in the vulnerable category. They have less leverage, less choices, but some of the larger companies that may even be listening to this, that there's definitely strategies out there. You could have a multi-year outlook, right? You could have some element of predictability based on data, right? So you control these outcomes over a period of time, and all of a sudden you're like, hey, I can see what's going on here. You pull a claims report monthly, you can kind of figure out where that renewal is going to be next year. CFOs are good at math. It's a math equation. It's money going in, money coming out. This is why it's important that CFOs are in the renewal meeting or in the mid-year renewal or the strategy sessions throughout the year. I know for our agency, we have multiple meetings throughout the year to help control some of this. We have multiple meetings that have those visits, not only for our own personal well-being, so know, like, and trust us, but the flip side is to make sure we're on the right course. If we're not on the right course, in some cases, we're not the right person, that we're going to tell you along the way that you're going to have to find a new broker, and you have a lead way for that. Obviously, we have a lot of resources that's rarely occurs, but obviously we're not going to force clients to stay with us, and clients should not, or these employers should not be staying with brokers because they've been with them for 20 years or there's some other loyalty. you need to have results, right? And so if you're not getting the results you're looking for, you're going to have to look. But CFOs need to be in that room because we're going to talk about money coming in, money going out, right? Who's the best to do this? CFOs. Or in some cases, it could be board of directors that are analyzing this. They have experience with this, controlling the cost and the outcomes, right? It could just be the partners or owners of the company as well. They need to be in that room. They can't just delegate. It could be millions of dollars of savings that you're controlling here. You need to have the right advisors in the room because these are key to help you get on the right track to become more predictable in your outcomes. And so you may have to shop advisors, just get opinions. I'm not saying you're going to find the right guy. I'm not saying to call me directly. I mean, that would be great, but I'm just saying that they're out there and you just need to do due diligence because you might be misled on something that you're not aware. And maybe the advisor's not doing everything, or maybe they can't too. So yeah, but the only way you're going to know is by looking at it, because sure, there's loyalty, right? You've probably been or know this guy. Maybe there's a personal connection. I've lost business because they moved to some guy in their church. Fine, right? Like it is what it is. But the reality is if there's ways to save money, save time, and it's not with the current guy, you're going to need to figure that out because there's plenty of times, and we have case studies, that we've saved small employers tens of thousands of dollars because we had different strategies compared to the current one. We've had larger clients that they saved hundreds of thousands of dollars by moving different strategies that their current broker either couldn't do, didn't want to do, or didn't know how. So I'm just saying second opinions and be expected to pay for it, right? Sure, there's a risk that we're taking. Sure, we're collecting a fee up front to give you a proposal that you could take back to the other guy. That's a risk, but we're getting paid for our time, and then you bought it, right? So you own it. And then in a lot of cases, they credit you back that money and commissions anyways if you do business with them. Some won't, and there's justifiable reasons why, but it's going to be outlined in an agreement that way. But in other cases, it's still going to cost you money in some capacity, so go get those results. And definitely just take the time. Things have to be thought out differently. You're going to be looking at a multi-year approach, not only to set it all up and move in the right direction, but it's going to have to take some time to get those results. You're not going to have overnight success. It just won't. You have to unwind 30 years of bad thinking, bad renewal process, bad strategy inside of a workplace. You're not going to do that overnight. You're too big. If you're a 5-life company, maybe, but you have less choices to begin with. You're still not going to produce things overnight because you're too small.